Simon and he rarely spoke these days, so the second he heard his cousin say,
"Hello, Martin. It's Simon."
he knew what had happened.
"Hello, Martin. It's Simon. I'm afraid I have some bad news."
"Oh dear," said Sturrock, the formulaic tones of death already taking over the conversation.
"Yes, I'm afraid so. My mother passed away in the night."
Aunt Jessica was the youngest of three, and Martin's father, having died 5 years before, the last of that generation of Sturrock siblings to go.
"I'm so sorry, Simon."
It's never easy to get the words right with deaths in the family, he thought. It was different if it was a friend telling you about the death of someone you didn't know. "I've been at a funeral," a colleague might say. "My uncle died." "I'm sorry to hear that," you'd reply, and it would be no more or less than your colleague expected. They'd want you to sympathise, but wouldn't expect you to go over the top about someone you'd never even met. With blood relatives, the death codes were not so simple. He had been close to his cousin as a child. Though he grew up in Hertfordshire and Simon in Somerset, they had spent all their holidays together, and he had enjoyed many happy weekends staying at his aunt and uncle's cosy farmhouse with its blue and white crockery and worn pine furniture. His father was an engineer whose work often took him abroad, and his mother thought that a bit of male company in the holidays would be good for him, rather than knocking around the house with her and his sister Jan. 15 months apart in age, he and Simon had played together, fought together, complained about their parents to each other, swapped ill-formed and confused fantasies about girls. But though there was kinship there was no lasting adult friendship. By the time he was in his mid-teens, he had stopped seeing so much of Simon. The allure of trips to Somerset had vanished. Instead, he formed closer bonds with his own school friends, refusing invitations to accompany his aunt and uncle on holiday, and so, slowly, he and his cousin had drifted apart. Where once they would see each other several times a year, as young adults building their own lives, that dwindled to Christmas and Easter, and now, as they neared pensionable age, it was usually weddings that brought them together, or funerals, the last of which had been Simon's father's. Sturrock could tell that Simon had already made the call to several others. It was as though he had a script and he was ticking off the main points. Passed away peacefully, something of a release in the end. Good innings. Sturrock thought it odd that even people who knew nothing about cricket and possibly had never watched, let alone played the game, used this phrase to describe the life of anyone who had lived beyond 80. Details of the funeral still to be decided. Then a couple of details from the last few days. In Aunt Jessica's case, how they knew things weren't good when she refused blackcurrant crumble on Monday evening, even though it was her favourite pudding. And also the story of a row with one of the nurses at the care home who insisted on her sitting downstairs with the other residents to watch afternoon TV when she actually just wanted to stay in bed.
"She was feisty to the end, then," said Sturrock. "Yes," said Simon, "feisty to the end."
It was strange to reflect how, in his youth, he really had thought of Aunt Jessica as feisty. He'd loved her energy, the way she would bustle around the farmhouse, making everyone feel wanted and involved in everything that was going on. He'd loved her cooking and her relaxed approach to mealtimes, bedtimes, and her appreciation of his sometimes unconventional opinions and ambitions. He considered it one of the great mysteries of nature that his grandparents had produced 2 children as different as his father and Aunt Jessica. But then there'd come a moment when he wasn't sure they were so different after all.
"I'm glad it was fairly painless when she went, Simon," he said, "and if there is anything we can do, just call."
He was conscious of how trite that sounded, then taken aback by the response it provoked.
"Oh, there is something, actually," said Simon. "I was hoping you might do the eulogy."
"Me?"